Good morning, Grace and friends. Here's my last season of Grace sermon on Jesus' parables, a parable about prayer. When I chose this parable last spring, I thought, how nice to end with a sermon on prayer. Then I reread it and studied about it, and whoa, it's about prayer, all right, but about courageous, fist-shaking, world-rearranging prayer. We first need to realize that Jesus is not comparing the judge in the parable to God, as if God needs to be worn down by our prayers until God finally listens and answers. Jesus is instead contrasting the judge to God. He describes the judge this way: he has no reverence for God nor respect for people. He doesn't need God. He's got a 2,000 denarii RV in the driveway and a gift from a wealthy donor and free travel anywhere in the Roman Empire. The justice and mercy of God have nothing to do with how he rules on cases. Then there's the widow. A couple months ago, a man campaigning for the Senate complained about what he called mouthy women. I wonder why we don't have the expression mouthy men. This week, the Taliban passed a law forbidding women to speak or sing in public. Another candidate for high office declared that the proper role for post-menopausal women was this: to take care of grandchildren and such. This widow does not know her place. So the title of the sermon, A Mouthy Woman and the God of Justice and Mercy. Luke had domesticated the parable a bit, framing it as a general teaching about the importance of prayer, about praying always and not losing heart. We need that kind of teaching all the time. But this parable about prayer is hard-edged. It's about the cry for justice, and it means business. The core of the parable, perhaps closest to its first telling by Jesus, is found in verses 2 through 5. Hear them again. He said, in a certain city there was a judge who had no reverence for God nor respect for people. Reverence for God and respect for people go together. This judge has neither. And in this city, Jesus goes on, there is a widow who kept showing up and saying to him, "Grant me justice against my opponent." Now comes the judge's interior monologue. Though I have no fear of God nor respect for anyone, yet because this widow keeps bothering me and driving me nuts, I will grant her justice so that she will not wear me out and give me a black eye. Was he afraid that she might show up one day, swing her purse and slam him in the face and literally give him a black eye? The Greek words used are boxing terms. If you were casting this parable as a movie, who would you get to play the widow? How about Bella Abzug, the former member of the House of Representatives? Can't you just see her in her big hat and purse? When she first ran for the House in 1971, her campaign slogan was, "A woman's place is in the House." Or the judge might have been afraid that the widow's constant public haranguing of him was giving him the proverbial black eye in public, and election season was around the corner. Now comes verse 6, which may have been Jesus' first application of the parable. Listen to what the unjust judge says. And will not God give justice to his chosen ones who cry out day and night? The answer, yes, he will. And God doesn't need to be worn down to answer. We don't need to keep pounding on the door. God's ear is always inclined to us. Well, what do you think about the parable so far? Now let's take and look at widows a moment and look at widows in the Bible. They were among the most vulnerable of that society, those most likely to be victimized by others. As I've mentioned a time or two, the most oft-repeated command in the Hebrew Scriptures was to care for the widow, the orphan, and the stranger. You find it in the Torah and the prophets and the Psalms. A widow's only Social Security after her husband died was a place in her husband's family. But that didn't always work out well. Widows could easily find themselves living in the streets, sometimes with their children. But there's another picture of widows in the Hebrew Scriptures. Widows as heroes. Think of Tamar and Naomi and Ruth. They kept the lineage of Abraham and Israel going by their strength and faith, and yes, wilds. They're in Jesus' family tree for that reason. The widow in this parable was both. She had been wronged badly, and she ferociously demanded the justice, the vindication, the payback the law allowed. And she was like our widow heroes as well, a feisty, persistent woman. We may remember Senator Mitch McConnell's unfortunate words trying to justify ruling Elizabeth Warren out of order as she read Coretta Scott King's letter opposing the confirmation of Jeff Sessions as Attorney General. McConnell said, "She was warned, nevertheless she persisted." You may have worn a t-shirt with those words. Nevertheless, she persisted. This widow was like that. And her plea for justice may have also been a plea for other widows as well. This widow is the hero of the parable. And since Jesus' parables were mostly about the kingdom of God, think today of the widow as the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God that keeps coming and coming, knocking, making a nuisance out of itself, keeps banging on doors until they open, and the kingdom of God comes on earth as in heaven. The widow's story brought to mind an exhibit I saw years ago at the Museum of the New South in Charlotte. It told the story of the beginnings of what became the Brown versus Board of Education ruling by the Supreme Court in 1954, which mandated the desegregation of public schools across the land. It was 1947 in Clarendon County, South Carolina. Black children walked up to 9 miles to get to their separate but equal public schools, black schools. White children rode school buses to their nicely furnished white schools. 75% of the children in Clarendon County were black, but 60% of the education dollars went to the white schools. A black preacher named J.A. Ledane took on the cause and found one man, Levi Pearson, who would join him in suing the school board to make them provide a school bus for black children. Levi Pearson's own daughter walked 8 miles a day to school. The judge in this case, much like the judge in our parable, dismissed the case on a technicality. That fall, Levi Pearson's credit was cut off by his fertilizer supplier, a white man. But Pearson and Delane would not be deterred. They visited a young lawyer in Columbia, South Carolina, named Thurgood Marshall, who later became the first African-American justice on the Supreme Court. He said he would take the case if more plaintiffs were found. The goal of 100 was set. By November of that year, they had gathered 107 Clarendon County plaintiffs willing to sue for equal education in the county. At the top of the petition form were the names of Harry and Eliza Briggs, whose home had become the place where people could come and sign the petition. The white people of the county began to put the squeeze on those who had signed the petition. Harry Briggs lost his job at the gas station. His wife Eliza lost her job as a hotel maid. Reverend Delane lost his teaching job, and both his house and his church were set aflame. A high school student named Reverdy Wells learned that his high school transcript had been altered to include an F before it was sent to Temple University, where he hoped to attend. His admission was denied. But these people wouldn't give up. They were a praying people. And their case went to the district court in Charleston, South Carolina. There they found an ally in a white judge named J. Waits Waring. The other two judges ruled against them, but Judge Waring wrote a dissent in which he said segregation in education can never produce equality. That dissent made possible an appeal to the Supreme Court and its Brown versus Board of Education decision, which led to the desegregation of our public schools. Judge Waring became an instant outcast in the white social circles of Charleston, and eventually he moved to New York. Prayer and action can prove costly, but look what happened when courage happened. I hope this story inspires you as it has inspired me. It reminds me so of the ministry of Jesus, who proclaimed and embodied the justice and mercy of the kingdom of God. He lifted up the poor and oppressed, those whom Howard Thurman described as those with their backs against the wall. He listened to women who came for help and healing, as in the story of the Canaanite woman who verbally jousted with him until he healed her daughter. John Dominic Crossan, in his study of the parables, said that Jesus is the parable of God. He is the clue and the key to unlocking the meaning of the parables. Now to the end of the parable. I tell you that God will soon grant justice to them, but when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? It's a poignant question. Will he? And by faith, we mean faith is prayer, prayer without ceasing. Prayer is the cry for justice and the making of justice. In the 1960s, Rabbi Abraham Heschel was teaching at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York City. He left his classes and traveled south to march with Martin Luther King from Selma to Montgomery. He was criticized for leaving his classes and his prayers. He answered his critics with these words, "I felt my legs were praying." And then he quoted Psalm 35:10. "All my bones shall say, O Lord, who is like you? You deliver the weak from those too strong for them, the weak and the needy from those who despoil them." Prayer is the center of our lives and the center of this parable. Rowan Williams, former Archbishop of Canterbury, one of my heroes and saints, has written profoundly on this topic in an essay called Intercessory Prayer. I've quoted him before to you on this. I do so again as a perfect commentary on this parable. Hear his luminous words as I pass the microphone to him. We don't think often enough of our intercessory prayer as a battle, but so it is, just as at one level the whole of prayer and spirituality is penetrated with warfare, with the struggle for freedom and vision. The prayer of intercession, he says, is at its simplest, thinking of something or someone in the presence of God. Then it's a struggle, all right, he goes on, the struggle not to let God and the world fall apart from each other, because that's the center of this prayer. The recognition that in spite of appearances, God and the world belong together. There is no place, he says, where the love of God can't go. Yes, God and the world belong together. And there is no place where the love of God and the justice of God and the mercy of God can't go. Don't give up praying.